Thanks for joining. I want to take an opportunity today to talk about one of the hidden effects that pressure has on leaders. That effect is isolation. The heavier the pressure becomes in our leadership, the harder it becomes for leaders to admit that they have issues. Some of those issues are exhaustion, uncertainty, frustration, emotional fatigue, and relational strain. Many high performing leaders will experience these things as the pressure mounts, and they'll say to themselves, I should be able to handle this. I don't need anyone's help. I've been given this leadership responsibility, and it's up to me to get over this. Over time, that creates a sense of isolation. Research from the Harvard Business Review and organizational psychology studies consistently show that leaders who lack psychologically safe relationships experience increased decision fatigue. It just becomes harder to make the important decisions and cascades down to maybe decisions that don't necessarily seem important but are. Emotional exhaustion, that feeling that I can't do this one more day. I'm challenged to do this one more day. I don't know how I'm going to overcome this. And that takes a toll on every aspect of our body, mind, and spirit. There's a reduced adaptability to change. Change comes in, we're not sure how we're gonna manage it, and we begin to get frustrated by it, and that frustration mounts up within, and we start to feel that impact on our health. Our trust begins to erode within ourselves, and then that stems into the other relationships that we have as well. And there's a higher risk of burnout, and burnout's real. If we've learned anything from the last few years about the pressures that mount up, about when we isolate ourselves from community, we feel that burnout even more. And we're not meant to do this alone. We were created for community, community within the way we operate socially, personally, and professionally. And so it's important that we deal with this idea. And there's one trait that I've experienced and that I see time and again, and that research tells us opens a door for getting out of isolation, and that trait's humility. Now, humility is not a quality that we tend to rush to when we think about leadership. In fact, we tend to look at some of the leaders that we hold up, and we see them as independent, we see them as strong, and they may be both of those things in many ways. But I came across an article some time ago that was published in 2012 by Time Magazine that I want to share a little bit with. It says that humility, a quiet, unappreciated strength. And the opening line reads that humility doesn't top the list of popular virtues these days, but if you ever need of help, a humble friend is more likely to be there for you than a prideful one, research suggests. That sounds like common sense, but we tend to put that aside in our leadership. We tend to really believe this myth that I can just push through this alone. But I want to share my story with you and the hard lesson I had to learn about the impact of pressure, the trap of isolation, and how that manifested into nearly destroying many of the most important relationships that I have and took my life. I have been blessed with a great career. I've worked with some amazing people. I've worked with in 4 great companies over that time. And in 2016, I was recruited to be the executive director of communications for Advent Health. I'd worked with them before, so this was a wonderful opportunity to return home to a place that had forged early in my career a lot of the values, a lot of the ideas, and a lot of the strengths that I picked up along the way. The organization was going through some major transformation. We had appointed a new CEO. The CEO had launched a new strategic plan, a vision for what we looked at to the year 2030 that we were rolling out. And we were about to rebrand the whole organization under Advent Health, take all of the 40 hospitals that were operated by Adventist Health System and rebrand it to Advent Health, a heavy lift. And in my role as executive director, I led the internal and external communications teams. I also had the opportunity and was blessed to support the CEO and his communications as we rolled this out. And I was driven to do the job, and I was inspired and motivated by a lot of great people around me. And I was focused on doing the job, but became a little obsessed more on how I was prioritized by the organization and what level of leadership I was being given to do that work, and aspired for higher promotion, higher opportunities to move into the next levels of leadership. And over the course of that time, a couple opportunities came up, and I was passed over for other people. And I began to harbor a resentment to that. That resentment really turned into anger. That anger then pushed me into isolation. As I became more frustrated about it, I became more angry about it, and I began to let that dictate how I felt on a regular basis. That bled into my home life and the way I was working at home, the way I was treating people at home, and even in other social circles. But where it all manifested and where it all came to bear was May 25th, 2019, when in the middle of the night I suffered what's called an acute aortic dissection. And to say that my heart broke is a very accurate description of what that condition is. The dissection is when your aorta splits open. And in my case, it split open from the carotid arteries all the way down to the base. I was literally bleeding to death as my wife rushed me to the hospital. I had a stroke on the way, so I was totally non-responsive. The medical team acted quickly and recognized that the signs weren't a heart attack as we'd initially thought. And so they airlifted me from the regional hospital to the tertiary care center in downtown Orlando. Our surgery team had to work for 6 hours to replace the entire upper arch of my aorta. There's about a 2% chance that you live through an event like this. And in my case, because we got there at just the right time, because they were able to work on me immediately, my chances got much, much better. But there was still a lot of doubt. They put me in a coma for a week just so, in the hopes that my organs could recover, that the heart could begin working again the way it should. But there was a lot of doubt. In fact, the prevailing idea that there was no prognosis for a positive outcome, that if I survived, I would need long-term nursing care because I would have some permanent brain damage. During the surgery, they literally stop your heart. You're clinically dead for certain periods as they go through this replacement. So I faced my mortality in that moment. And by the grace of God, or as I say, the mission, the medicine, and the miracles that were all at work during this period, when I woke up, I had all my faculties and I could start my journey again. But here's the key. I had to be humble enough to admit what was wrong, what needed to be fixed. And that lives within the construct of the trust transformation. One of the guiding principles that we live by is that we build trust from the inside out. It begins here, deep inside of us. And so as I began that journey, which physically was gonna take a major toll on me. I couldn't discount the emotional and the spiritual side of that, and that humility to take a step back and say, what wasn't I doing right? How do I get out of the prison of isolation?" And I had to create accountability. I had to work on the integrity of what I did because the damage that occurred was happening long before the dissection came. It was happening in how I was dealing with relationships, how I was managing um, my professional life and my personal life. And I'd made some terrible decisions that, in the wake of the physical things that were wrong, had done significant emotional and spiritual damage as well. And so I had to have the humility to invite accountability in my life that I wasn't doing prior to that. I had to seek people out who would speak into my life with great candor and great honesty, who would hold me accountable to do the things that I needed to do, both for my physical recovery, my spiritual recovery, the emotional recovery that needed to take place. And those were hard, but they were a blessing. And they are a blessing that continues to be active in my life today and the things that I do. When we look at humility, we have to embrace it as a strength, because when we have humility, we're able to listen, we're able to receive feedback, we're able to stay teachable in every moment, which allows us to repair relationships that we have, or or seek the relationships that we need in everything that we do. It allows us to ask for help and recognizing that we're not meant to do it alone. And while each of us are given a set of strengths, foster a set of skills that are unique to us and important for us to have to contribute, there's an acknowledgement of the things that we're not good at that's equally important, so that we can invite the people in who are. And then we've got to acknowledge those limits that we have. All of that works at both the personal and professional level. And as we think about it from a leadership level, I go back to Jim Collins' work, Good to Great. And in that work, he talks about level 5 leaders or servant leaders, people who understand the calling to leadership is about serving the people that you lead. You think about that, we get hung up in the title, in the job description, in the status of what that is, and exercise leadership from a looking down perspective, when in fact, the very best leaders and the ones who make a legacy impact with the work they do see it from the ground up. And how am I serving the people that I've been called to serve? Collins points out that combined with a fierce resolve to achieve what's set before you, it's done with a deep humility, not ego, not self promotion, but humility. And so, as we think about this and we wrestle with it, because again, it's not necessarily the natural course of order, because we have pride and we have ego and we have a desire for certain things that may get in the way. Here's some questions for us to consider. Number one, what pressure causes you to emotionally withdraw? When you're feeling a challenge, when you know you're doing something you shouldn't be, when you feel drawn to things that are taking you off course, how does that feel? And do you recognize that you're withdrawing? Second, what are you carrying silently right now? What's holding you back? What are you what habits are you diving into that distract you from the thing that you should be doing? You know, what temptation seems to pop up every day and suck you into a rabbit hole that keeps you from either doing the job that you need to do, building the relationships that you need to build, repairing the relationships that need to be addressed, dealing with the challenges that should be your priority. Where do you struggle asking for help? This one's hard because we don't want to exercise vulnerability. We don't want to admit where there might be a weakness in the things that we're doing. And that keeps us from being the very best that we can be. In Brene Brown's writing, she talks about vulnerability and just jumping into it with people. And while it's not comfortable, when you start, it's a habit that we need to build and do that. And that speaks to one of the key ideas of building trust from the inside out, which is the attribute of being trustworthy or having trust in ourselves. And that's anchored by three qualities that we have to work on every day. Our integrity. How do you practice that? How do you rehearse that? How do you pour into that on a regular basis, both through the things that you read, the time that you spend, the people that you invite into your life for accountability, and then our attitude. How are we managing our attitude every day? When I was going through that dark period of isolation, I wasn't managing that attitude. I wasn't grateful for what I had. And gratitude is an exercise that actually rewires the brain, that puts us in the right state to deal with the good things that happen as well as the bad things that may happen. And exercising that gratitude adjusts the attitude and moves you to a different place completely. And then the third of those three qualities within trustworthiness that becomes very important is focus. Are you focused on the right thing right now and taking initiative to deal with that? And the last question to ponder as we think about humility is in avoiding isolation. How has pressure affected your relationships? Are you reacting or responding? Reacting is when we just let the emotion run with it and have that visceral action that takes place sometimes when that pressure begins to mount up. And responding is taking the pause to be able to reflect on it. I was at a funeral this week, and in the program celebrating the life of the wonderful woman that we were there to acknowledge, she uh, had a poem called "The Pause," and you can look it up. But essentially, it talks about that moment that occurs between stimulus and response and what we do with it. In closing, I want to share one more story with you. I've been married for 36 years. My wife and I have been blessed with four wonderful children. We have three sons and a daughter. Our daughter's the youngest, and she and I have an incredibly special relationship. She's 24 years old, just graduated with her bachelor's degree, finding herself and finding what that opportunity is going to be to build her life and her career. This story goes back to when she was 5. I came home one Friday night, and Faith, as she was apt to do, had turned our dining room into a bracelet factory. And if you have a daughter, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The beads and the bands were strewn across the table, a lot of them on the floor. But she was so excited, met me at the door, had this bracelet, and said, "Daddy, I made a bracelet for you. Will you wear it?" And I told her yes. It was Memorial Day weekend. And so we went out to a church picnic. We went to the mall, the movies, and I became show and tell for her. She would show off that bracelet and tell everybody about everything. The weekend came to an end. I had to go to work that Tuesday morning and put my suit on, which tells you how far back that was. Left the bracelet on my dresser and went off to work. I came home that night, Faith still making bracelets. Kim and I are in the kitchen making dinner, and Faith comes in with a different bracelet, different beads, different colors. And I'm thinking to myself, I've only got so much arm to give to your cause. Well, she looks at me and says, Daddy, if you didn't like the other bracelet, will you wear this one? That's a humiliating moment for a father. There I was standing in the kitchen, an expert in communications and trust and relationships, and I'd blown it with my 5-year-old daughter. So I went back in the bedroom and I grabbed that bracelet and I put it on, and I wear it every day. This is it. And I wear it for two primary reasons and a third that I want to close out our conversation on. The two primary reasons are, one, because I told her I would. The second is it reminds me that every little thing that I say or do is either contributing to or taking away from the trust that other people have in me. And the closing thought is it's an exercise in humility and being humble to understand it's not all about me. It was about us. And I needed that to be what was important in that moment. And I needed to live by that every single day in everything that I do. And I hope you'll take action today. Take a step back, recognize it's not all about you, and exercise humility in your leadership. Thanks for joining.